should you let AI build your app? Well, vibe coding's been around for a while now, and people are saying that you don't need to look at the code anymore and you can just ship products as long as you can market. And I actually think that's kind of true. But I'm a software developer building products after hours, and I've been using these tools, and I think everybody's asking the wrong question. It's not whether you can vibe code your product, it's whether you should. In this video, I'm going to break down exactly where vibe coding excels, where it sucks, and how you should think about it if you're building something right now. Okay, so before we get started, I think it's really important that we define terms before we start agreeing or disagreeing on things. So for the sake of the video, what does vibe coding actually mean? Well, vibe coding to me actually just means letting an LLM or an AI model take complete control over your code base without actually reviewing any of the code, or maybe even just partially some of the code. I will also state that I think you're vibe coding if you are giving coherent statements and prompts to the AI, but you're not reviewing every single line of code that it generates. Okay, so that's what I think vibe coding is, but I will say I don't think you're vibe coding necessarily if you're prompting every single line of the code base, if you're still reviewing every single line of code that is generated. I don't think that's vibe coding. I would just call that agentic engineering, and that's more of so just like abstracting away the syntax so you could focus on the higher level details of software engineering. Okay, so now that we've talked about my personal definition of vibe coding, I really want to talk about whether or not you should be vibe coding if you're planning on distributing software products. Surprisingly, I don't think there's a lot of nuance to this question. I will say I think there are some things that you can 100% vibe code. For example, on your SaaS product, if you have a specific landing page for marketing that doesn't take auth or doesn't take any data in, and it's just HTML, CSS, then I think it's totally cool to vibe code that. Like, let's be real, you don't really need to look at that. And, these top models are actually pretty good at that nowadays. So if the responsiveness of it isn't perfect, that's totally fine. You're not actually vibe coding anything that could be really problematic. Another situation where I think it's okay to vibe code is if you have an idea, but you haven't really worked it out in your mind, just check out a feature branch and then just completely vibe code it, and see the result. And then once you kind of get it working, then completely delete that and then actually get it implemented with your own code. I think it's a quick way to get motivation and to keep the momentum going when you have some sort of idea that needs to be validated, but it kind of will, potentially take a while to do. But beyond that, like, to be honest, I don't think you should be vibe coding. Okay, I don't know if I stated this early, but I'm specifically talking about this whole thing is contingent on if you plan on distributing apps. I just wanted to put that out there. And okay, I know, but Brendan, like, there's people out there making thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars off of vibe coded apps that are made by marketers. You're wrong. Who cares what the AI outputs if the end user likes it and it looks good? I mean, sure, I get it. I like that thought. But then you have to start thinking about security, right? Like, there's an unsaid expectation when someone signs up for your application that their data is going to be protected and secure, and it's not even something they should be thinking about. For example, let's say you're building a budgeting app. Users connect their bank accounts, transactions, balances, everything. You vibe code it, it works. The dashboard looks clean, but you never looked at the code. Now imagine that data leaks. Someone's full financial history is exposed. That's not just a bug you can patch. That's someone's personal information out in the world. Honestly, you could be facing legal action. There's probably some sort of privacy violations, and overall your product's definitely cooked. And that's all because you either didn't understand the code or you just didn't review the code the AI wrote. I know some of you are probably thinking, like, what is the AI actually going to mess up? Like, what could actually go wrong in the code that would make this not a viable strategy? And I got to admit, like, I haven't seen this, in the past few months, but in the past I have seen people store users' passwords as plain text in the database, not hashed, not salted, just sitting there as plain text. And that's like really scary to think about, especially if you're carrying sensitive data in the application. That is just a really scary scenario. If someone gets access to that database, they don't need to crack anything. The passwords are just there and they can use that, and a lot of people reuse their passwords across many different applications. So basically that can harm a lot of people's lives. And there's probably a lot of implications that we don't even know about with that. And this is something that I haven't really seen recently, but I mean, I'm sure it's still happening. I don't know if it's because I'm not like looking for it or what, but I've seen API routes not have auth on them before. And like, that's just really scary that users' data has no authorization checks on them. And on the front end for the user, it looks fine. And for you who doesn't know what you're doing potentially, or maybe you do know what you're doing, but you just didn't look, like, that's just not cool. That's not cool at all to be able to expose people's data that they expect is secure. And it's not even something they should be worried about. Like, this is ridiculous. And then there's database queries. For some reason, AI just loves writing raw SQL where it drops user input straight in. Someone types the right thing into your search bar. Now they're running commands directly on your database. The scary part about all of this is that none of it is visible from the UI. You can have your app run fine, your demo looks great, users are signing up, everything looks fine on the surface, but underneath, like everything is in shambles and you have no idea until someone ends up deciding to exploit you. Now, I mean, like honestly, in April 2026, I think that most of the models, the best models out there, do a pretty good job with security on web development, but I still think that you have a moral and ethical obligation to do your best attempt at trying to protect your users' data. And if you're just not looking at the code or you just don't even care, like, hey, I'm not going to tell you what to do, but like I don't really think that's a good decision. And I think it's definitely worth like really questioning yourself. If you aren't an engineer and you're using these tools and you're trying to figure it out and trying to make money, like you need to do your due diligence and understand what's going on. I'm not going to stop you from not caring, but I think once you have real users and you're storing data, you have a real responsibility to make sure that your stuff is secure. And that's just something to sit with, because you really need to think hard if you should build the app that you want to build, because you're responsible for your users' data. And not only that, you need to learn these things. You need to learn how security works in web development. You need to learn how APIs work. You need to learn how authorization and authentication works. And these things really take time. And I know that there's like a lot of like crypto grifters coming into this space and everything, but like I really wanted to make this video because people that are in that headspace should realize that they're going to have to really put in a lot more work than they really think to get the outcome they want. And if they don't, they're probably going to have insecure systems built that could potentially get them in a lot of legal trouble. And by then you've already invested so much time into building this application. Like you're like starting to become a developer. Like you almost have to become a developer to do it right. And I don't know, it's just something to think about for sure. But for you engineers out there, like I'm gonna be honest, like we can cook up some pretty crazy stuff now, which is pretty cool. And I'm not in like the whole crypto bro, like grifter headspace or anything like that. I still think we're obviously bottlenecked by code review, which really takes a long time. But I think now that we're able to kind of abstract a lot of the thought process, or like having to Google something as simple as like a regular expression, those things kind of add up over time. Like when you're paying so much attention to the specific syntax, like you still have to review it, right? But like actually just thinking about producing that like takes mental bandwidth. And now that you kind of get that bandwidth back, you can use that extra bandwidth to put towards architecting really amazing systems that could better serve your users, instead of focusing so much time on syntax that's honestly kind of a waste of time. From what I've seen, there are far too many engineers that are depressed or have a negative outlook on AI. And I get it, but like be for real, bro. Like if anyone can capitalize on these models, it's the ones who have been building software for years. It leaves us in a place to explore ideas that would have taken way, way, way too long to implement. And now you can validate in a weekend or two and get motivation to actually see it through, which I think is really, really amazing. So I think it's a really special time for developers right now. But I also think it's a really scary time right now for people who out there that are getting sold the idea that they can build software now and it's expendable and it's so easy and like anybody can build any software. It's just an idea. And I mean, like, this has obviously been said before, but it's just a lie. And the reason why I say it's a lie is not because you can't produce software. It's because those systems that you're building, it's a liability. And that liability for a lot of people is just not worth, making even 10 grand, 15, 20 grand, when you're putting people's lives potentially at risk over exposing their bank account information or their addresses or their emails, images of them, whatever it may be. And I think this is a really important topic, and I think it will continue to be, maybe 2027, 2028, who knows how the space is going to change with LLMs and how much better they get. But I think this is going to continue to be a relevant topic and something that we really need to care about for a while. In one last example I want to talk about is my wife was telling me about an influencer in her industry. She works in the healthcare space, and she was telling me about how this woman is vibe coding an application and it contains patient health information, which like that's going to be really interesting. And when she told me that, I was just like, oh boy, I can't believe people out here getting sold this lie that they can do this. And with patient health information and stuff like that, it's a scary game, and people don't even know that it's a problem. But anyways, if you want to build an application that has end users, please make sure you know what you're doing. If you're just building stuff for your own internal use and you're not an engineer, like cool, like honestly, like that's dope. And I'm actually really excited that more people are exploring the space. It just gives more room to talk about software and web development, software engineering. So I think that's really amazing. But, if you are planning on distributing a vibe coded app and you're not an engineer and you're not making sure your code is protected, like I'm gonna just say good luck. All right, have a good one, y'all. Ooh, and by the way, please like or subscribe. It doesn't need to be both, but I would really appreciate it. Thank you so much.